Hello, welcome back to the second attempt of a men's talk about loss, kind of interview, chat, get to know each other kind of thing. I'm Callum. I'm a Glasgow Let's Talk About Loss host, and since my since the last one of these, my last introduction, I'm no longer a PhD student. Now got a real job, joined the real world. So I work for a wind turbine consultancy. So I'll just pass over to Chris to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Christopher Leach. I'm a PhD researcher over at Edge Hill. My PhD is in psychology. I'm looking at video games and student mental health. Aside from that, I do like some content creation. I host a podcast. I stream weekly on Twitch. I'm affiliated as an ambassador for mental health charity Safe in Our World, and Take This over in the US. So I do both of that. I sort of the watered down version of my jobs, because obviously who can just have one job nowadays, is PhD researcher, graduate teaching assistant, content creator, and accessibility consultant. I'm available for all those things.
Nice. Yes, my job description was very much like that when I was doing my PhD too. Now it's a lot more streamlined into just two things.
I mean, I dream of one day approaching that level of streamline.
So, Chris, tell me about your experience of grief. What is your story? What's happened to you? When did it happen?
So honestly, we got to get the this way they say life is stranger than fiction. I'm gonna tell you this, and you're gonna sit there and go, Chris, you're lying to me, because absolutely like bananas is the only way I can describe it. So my dad passed away about getting on 10 years now. About a decade ago. I was fresh-faced in university, undergraduate, first year, and he sort of upped and died. He was an alcoholic, so like that was was a very sort of crappy cycle. Would drink, and he was like what you might call the worst type of alcoholic, and he was functioning. So he would drink every night, get very drunk, and then like be passable the next day. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't know unless you knew. And he passed away, and because of various sort of familiar things, I was his next of kin, so I had to sort of fall that out. As it happened, within the 12 months prior to that, we had lost my grandmother and my auntie on the same side, so it was a hat trick in 12 months. But that left like my grandma's house to sell and things like that. So it was a bit of an omnishambles. As it happened though, and this is where it starts to get fictional, but it's 100% true. Basically, I can't say too much on it, but the long story short is it transpires that my dad didn't just so much pass away as he was actually murdered. His life was taken.
Oh, right.
Like for money, basically, by a sort of at then a family friend, who like the week before he was gonna go and write a will, he happens to die, but he was gonna leave me some. That's, and you honestly think that's ridiculous, but truly what happened. So and the reason that's important is because that sort of first year, I was just on autopilot. I was in uni. I remember like 2 days after this happened, I went into a class and I had a deadline. I emailed the module tutor. I was like, yeah, by the way, my dad just died. Can I get an extension on this essay? And their response was, and I quote, "I can understand this is a distressing time for you, so I won't ask for proof. You can have an extra week." And I thought, yeah, a week, I'll be sorted in a week. Any bother. So on principle, I submitted it on time, just to make a point of how unhelpful a week was.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by like majority of their 18-year-olds, couple people who are a bit older, but none of them had sort of experienced any type of bereavement. So the kind of cycle was, I would be fine because I felt like I had to be this, strong sort of, I was supporting my family members. I was going through this paperwork. I had assignments to do. It was like, just get through the year, get to summer. The summer was then spent selling a house, which I don't know if anyone has ever done, but it's an absolute farce. Let alone when like it's not the house you live in and you're having to commute to it to try and sell it and clean it and all that type of business. So I was like really on autopilot, and it wasn't until like a year after this that it kind of hit me. So the cycle was kind of like, oh, we're going out, let's go out. I'd have a little bit too much to drink. I'd get upset. People wouldn't know what to do. They kind of go at me with a stick, kind of be like, like really all you want is someone just put your arm around you and just tell you that like it's okay. But I have like distinct visions of like mates just sort of stood like in the room, just really awkwardly, like, he's sobbing now. We don't know what to do about this.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there's a reason we didn't stay friends, because really, like, there's a kind of lack of empathy there. just a lack of genuine human empathy. But that happened, and it was like, the year passed. I felt into a really low like period of mental health. I was struggling with it, to process it, and then this thing about like it not just him passing away, it being like someone took his life, brought a lot of like anger and frustration back up. I mentioned he was an alcoholic. Like he was sort of, he'd realized once sort of myself and the rest of the family had moved out that was the cause of his problems, and we'd built bridges just before he'd passed away.
All right.
And he was like committed to change, so that there was that anger of like, oh, like he might have changed. We could have maybe had a relationship, and that being taken away. Now I did listen to the previous episode. I know this is quite a different flavor to the bereavement that was on that one. Because to be honest with you, we talk about grief, but a lot of the time my dad was a bit of a dick, to be fair. So like, when I think back, there's a couple of nice memories, but most of the time it's just him being an ass, and that's because he was an alcoholic. It's not, we can talk about addiction, and you can try and pin blame, but ultimately addiction is addiction. With a psychology background, ultimately his biophysiology was being changed, which is fancy words for his brain chemicals that made him act and feel differently. He was also dealing with a lot because he was actually at the Hillsborough disaster. And I think a part of him like never recovered from that. It's not for me to diagnose, but he was definitely experiencing some stress after that event and after witnessing things there, which is completely understandable, obviously. A horrific event. And it took that period. So there was this kind of like, it was fine, then it was bad, then it was like angry, and that made it okay, and then we sort of fell back down again to another really low period where my mental health was just in the toilet. Now, the links to why I'm doing the work I'm doing, because and this is my common sort of go-to joke, but like when you're at university, there's always like that. It's usually a lady, but a nice lady that comes in an induction week and says, "We have student well-being services, but we're extremely understaffed, underfunded, and there's a wait list of about 6 weeks, but that's slightly better than what you can get on the NHS." It's always before lunch as well, so everyone's slightly tuned out because they're hungry. So like I went to like university counseling, and it was pretty much straight cognitive behavioral therapy. Like try whenever you think about something sad, think about something else, which is fine, but I think I needed something a little bit more than that, and it helped at the time. But I think like the road to recovery was definitely a bit longer after that. And I say recovery because like it was learning to process this, that there was no other information or guidebook about how to deal with it. The people around me didn't know how to talk about it. Some of them had all their grandparents and all their aunties and uncles still alive. So they'd never even had a pet pass away on them. This was like completely alien to them. So it was really difficult to try and explain. And I think one of the things that helped was centering that in that I'm experiencing these mental health challenges, like I'm experiencing depression and suicidal ideation and things. And that kind of helped ground it in that, it's something that I was experiencing, and this is why. I personally would categorize grief and bereavement within mental health challenges. That's a personal opinion, because I think it's a state of mind, and it is linked to so many other negative conditions, if not managed well. I feel like I'm getting very whimsical, but it feels like that. It's like I just today I was having a conversation with someone who's a doctorate of education, and we were talking about school curriculum and how learning about something like bereavement in school would have been really useful. You mentioned on the last episode, it's important for other people to know how to handle you as much as you to handle yourself. I would categorize that as being a good bystander.
Mhm.
Getting that type of training would be really useful at that age, as opposed to, say, Pythagoras theorem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't step on Pythagoras too much. That's my bread and butter.
Like, he's cracking, but like in terms of like daily skills,
Yeah.
living
No, I know
skills,
exactly what you mean.
one's a bit more niche than the other. I think people. So obviously, a lot of people are familiar with the 5 Kubler-Rossi stages of grief, and I really disagreed with those for a long time until I read in The Psychology of Zelda, as it happens, a good book. Definitely recommend reading it if you're a nerd like me. That like it's not, people think of the stages as actual steps, like you go
Mhm.
through them, but in
Yeah.
actual fact, you can swing between them.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's like a lot of people don't register that part of it. So like like denial and anger, like both feature and stuff. So I was
Mhm.
very like angry and, like I say, like a little bit sad when that all sort of came out in the wash, and they sort of like ended up moving. They moved away, and they not long then passed away themselves in like not suspicious but like spooky circumstances, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah, that is quite spooky. Uh,
It's I'm happily agnostic, maybe like ever so slightly spiritual, but like it still gives me a little spine shiver.
so obviously, Let's Talk About Lost wasn't around at the time. Um, but when did you first hear about Let's Talk About Lost? Was it when you met Beth not that long ago, or?
Yeah, so to sort of like circularly plug, I'd done an article for Taming Gaming about sort of the games of my life that had
Mhm.
featured around my grief, because one of the big, obviously I study games, but one of the big things that I think helped keep my mental health with some level of consistency was playing a lot of FIFA while I was working on assignments, because I could just focus on it. It was purely distraction. Because if I was just focusing on playing a game of football, I was not depressed.
Mhm.
you know. So I did that, and Beth, found it, reached out to me, and said like, "Would you be up for having a chat?" I was like, "Yes, let's do it." And obviously, then naturally, I had a little snoop of what you'll do. Let's talk about Lost, and I thought, this is amazing. This is the exact kind of thing that would have been really useful to me at the time, and in like a roundabout way. Like again, I kind of bundle it in as mental health.
Mhm.
The stigmatization towards mental health generally, I include grief as a part of that. So part of my work, like as a mental health advocate, and I cover this kind of stuff in content creation. I talk about it. I don't give advice because that's not ethical. Just gonna point that out. But I talk about my experience and sort of like the way I dealt with things, just as a way to help break down barriers for other people talking about them. Now, obviously, for me, bereavement, grief, depression, anxiety are all linked. They're all
Mhm.
transcendentally, they follow a quite linear path, and that's not the same for everyone. But for me, like it's part of that story and part of the reason to explain it all. Really.
Yeah, so that's definitely what we try and the environment that we try and make it. Let's Talk About Loss. As a host, I don't provide any kind of service. I have no even basis to offer any advice. Zero understanding beyond a regular person, apart from, you know, I've been bereaved for a long time. Um, so when I first heard about it and wanted to go along, it was through one of my friends, Ruth, who started the group with me. She posted on Instagram, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is the best thing ever! This is exactly what I would have needed and wanted when I was 16 and lost my mum." And because all the kind of services that were there available to me, that people would say you could do this or you could do that, you can speak to this person, it was too much of a parent child dynamic for me. Everyone was in their 40s and 50s, and I wanted to be treated like an adult, even though that seems really crazy for me now at 26 to be 16. And if I seen a 16-year-old now, I just think they're 12. you know uh so when I went along at first, I had two main thoughts. I was like, this is going to be the first place that I'm actually going to be able to talk about my mum dying, where people aren't going to look at me a little bit like, what is he going to say next? and where is he going with this, and am I going to need to like be on my best behavior for 10 minutes? And then the other thing was, I don't know why I had this in my brain, but I absolutely knew I was going to be the only guy there. And I thought that kind of like sent me back for a wee bit. Like, is that going to be weird for me? Because, I never really had that many female friends. And I was like, is it going to be weird trying to talk to women about this? And we kind of perceive things in different ways. We grew up with different ways of talking about things.
So terrible joke. I'm gonna say it anyway because I don't care.
Right?
When I spoke to Beth and she's like, the group's a majority female. Like there's very few guys that go. I was like, that sounds like a great idea to me. That's not a bad thing. like, oh look, women that understand what grief is like. That's gonna help a lot of bridges.
Yeah. My friends.
It's not a dating service. I know. It's purely
my friends made a lot of jokes about that when I first started going and first became a host. That it was just about meeting girls, but I promise it was absolutely not like that.
Well, Callum, like I'm sure you want to meet all the sad weepy girls off of the shoulder, towels on each shoulder from to cry on.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what it's all about, really.
No, definitely not. Yeah, so as I knew there was going to be no guys there, and I'd consolidated myself that I was like, right, I'm happy with that. But I think there will be other guys who aren't happy with that. There are other people that be like, that's too uncomfortable for me. If it was a group of guys, you'd probably expect no one to cry. But with a group of girls, you'd expect everyone to cry. And
I don't know. I think don't everyone listeners keep this between us. But I've been with groups of guys where people have cried. We keep it top secret, but it does happen.
Yeah, it does happen every now and then. But I would have, if it was going to be a male dominated space, I would expect everyone to be quite brutish in their first encounter, to try and be masculine about it. So I thought there's going to be guys out there who would benefit from this, but maybe don't want to come because it's a female, or not dominated, a female totaled space. Because so yeah, that was my first, kind of couple of times. And from that, then I was like, I want to get more involved in this. I want to become a host and then do things like this, like these chats, go on podcasts and radio shows and things, and just kind of be someone who is like a normal guy who talks about death and grief, and doesn't it's try and kind of plug the idea that it's not any less masculine to do that.
I mean, it's so at odds with like this macho kind of, I'm dead strong, I'll beat people up, and all Vikings are dead course, they kill people. But also death makes me really sad, so I can't talk about it. Like I find that to be such a weird juxtaposition when death and taxes are the only thing guaranteed in life, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're just so crap at talking about it. I think part of that is culture. I think it's Western culture. I think particularly British culture is like that whole, I think you used the phrase in the last episode, but like that stiff upper lip, kind of like, well, we don't talk about this, because you do have that, disquiet of like, oh, you mention it, and like I've been in places like, okay, he's the guy with the dead dad, that's gonna get brought up eventually, and it just breeds animosity. It's just awkward, and I get that it makes people feel uncomfortable, but it's also really natural to talk about. And I think I kind of am in an interesting position, because not long, well, I'll say not long, but it was a few years actually. But I think within sort of like 5 or so years of this happening, I had actually met a couple of the people who had lost their parent. And like that obviously like was a lot of neutral ground. I remember the first time I'd spoken to someone who had been through it, and I was talking and giving it this, and they were like, oh, actually I've been through the same thing. And like I was like, it was like that Step Brothers thing of we just become best friends.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, you actually get it. Like you actually know what I'm talking about, and you don't just think I'm chatting mince. And that was like a beautiful moment. And that, like in this instance, that was another guy as well. So there was that parallel of like, oh yeah, like between us in this space we can talk about it, it's okay. But I just think it's like I think because it is so emotionally charged, and I am someone who has always been described as, very, very mature, very delicate, other buzzwords that I've heard from like Robert Webb's How Not to Be a Boy, kind of I'm sensitive. You know what I mean? Like I'm in touch with my feminine side, like back in the noughties, type of phrasing that doesn't really wash now. And like, so I was always kind of, and I do think you'll be talking about age, but I think there's it certainly yanks you up a little bit of maturity when you have to go through this, because it is such a transformative experience that you get no help with.
Yeah.
Like trying to beat a Dark Souls boss without any type of guy. you just get shucked in. And you're like, okay, I'll try. And I think, if we're going by traditional sort of gender biases, women are socially allowed to be more emotionally expressive in public spaces, and men aren't. So it makes things like this, like mental health loss, really important, because we should be talking about it. If we don't, there's a Panic at the Disco alert that's, if you don't let it out, you're gonna let it eat you away, and that's exactly what it does. It will just eat you from the inside out.
Yeah, and that was very much the first 5 years of my grief journey. Losing my mum at 16, then like you said, I went into autopilot. I had exams to do. I was like, I need to get going with these. Didn't do that well first time round, had another go, did all right, got myself to uni. And that was like the entire goal of those 2 years, from when my mum died to, it's just get to uni. If things will be better when you get there. And then I realized very quickly when I got there that I'd never spoken to anyone about it, and I didn't know how to tell new people. So obviously, like being 18, it's just kind of assumed that you have both parents. There's obviously like divorce is relatively common now, and there is kind of that kind of thing. But I worked that out with my friends very quickly based on like their stories. Everyone had stories from high school, stories of growing up, but with me, my mum was present in so many of those stories because it was, right up until 16. So then I kind of went through uni and just didn't tell anyone. I'd left it way too long. It'd been like 2 or 3 months. And I went from, I don't know if these people are going to be my friends and I think it's too soon, to these are now my friends and I've waited way too long to mention it. So I just continued along the path of, just won't bring it up. Just won't talk about it. Just let them work it out their own one day. And
yeah. I love that. Like, that's like, we'll just let them work it out. It touches on, again, you mentioned this in the last episode, like that if you haven't already watched that, but like I just go in with a really dark joke. It's a great way to read the room. Like, I know I'm going to be friends with you if you're okay with it, but also like it gets the point across. Like, oh, what you do? Oh, what do your parents do? Oh, my mum does this, my dad, he's blowing in the wind,
yeah.
and they're just like, what? And I'm like, oh, he's passed, it's his ashes. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
oh, pushing up daisies, another good one. Watching over me, that's another nice one. So like you just gotta hit it with that really macabre kind of dark humor. So in the same vein, I remember I sat down for my first dissertation meeting at undergrad, and my supervisors, third year, and he said, this do dissertation, it's hard, it's gonna be difficult, you're gonna do some crappy science. And I just looked him square in the eye and just went, if I can make it through first year with my dad dying, I can do anything.
Yeah.
And he just sort of went, fair play. All right, then. Like, what? How do you respond to that?
Yeah.
I think it's, and I think one of the things you have to do is it's knowing how to talk about it, because I think I've come across other people who kind of wield it, and it's kind of like their response to everything. Like, oh, my dad died. You know what I mean? And I think like you have to manage that. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm going to say in our case, as people who've lost like parents. But the other thing I find is that people go, my grief isn't as worse as yours because it's a grandparent or a pet or someone that they're not, I don't know, as close to. And I always say it doesn't matter. Your grief is relative to you. It doesn't matter. It's like scraping your knee when you're a kid is the worst thing you've ever experienced. It doesn't, and like we know cognitively that it's not compared to other things, but it's still the worst thing you've ever felt at that time. And I think this whole like people removing value from their own emotions, like I'm not sad. I shouldn't be this sad. It's not as bad. It's incomparable. That's not the point.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. Even now, like when someone comes along to the group and they've got like, a really sad story or someone really close to them, if it's like, you know, they don't have a particularly good relationship with their family and they've like adopted a family with a really close friend and they've lost that person, it always like makes me, think about how lucky I was that it wasn't as bad as that, which is like, quite a horrible thing to be thinking about. And I got my mum died of breast cancer, so I had from when I knew she was going to die, I had like 10 months with her, and that was really nice and it was really great. Whenever I hear about people who lose someone suddenly, I just think like, whoa, like I had 10 months of pre-process and 10 months of goodbyes before I really needed to say goodbye. And I still find myself kind of putting down my experience compared to other people.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Like absolutely wild. Like your feelings are valid. I know it's like a really like sounds like a generic therapy phrase, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really true. Like your feelings are totally valid because like they're what you're feeling, right? And I think it can make you feel like someone's like, oh, I lost like a grandparent, and and you can go, you almost don't want to say, oh well, I lost my dad, because you just know they're gonna go, and
Yeah.
it's not a misery Olympics, like it's meant to be supportive, but like you just know it's gonna change how they feel about it. It's really like delicate.
Yeah, one of my close friends lost his grandmother must have been like 4 years ago now. And she like lived in the house with him, but he didn't really speak about it all that much. And I just kind of, as guys do, feel really bad about this now. Just kind of assumed that like he was dealing with it okay because he didn't speak about it too much. But then, finding out later on how like deeply it affected him, and he didn't really bring it up to me in particular because it wasn't as big as losing a mum,
Mm.
which is just so sad and such a horrible thing to think about.
I think so. I can again sum it up with a nice little anecdote. Like the night this all happened, like I got home and my first thing was to call one of my closest mates. They were
Mm-hmm.
always there to support me. I called them and I said, "This has happened. My dad's died," and he was just like, "I don't know what to say." And I was like, "I don't expect you to know what to say. I just need someone to chat to me."
Mm-hmm.
And like he was happy to oblige that, but it was just like you don't know what to say. I think as well. I'd like to know your experience, but like, what was your first sort of experience ever with grief? Because it's this kind of like joke that we touched on before of like, oh, parents will get their kids pets to teach them about death.
Yeah. So I both of my grandfathers died before I was born, and one of my grandmothers died when I was like 2 years old. So next to no experience with grief prior to my mum dying. The only thing that I did experience, which I can't still to this day can't decide whether it was good or bad for my parents to put me through this. After finding out that my mum was terminally ill, they took me to a funeral of someone who was related to me who I'd not really known very well. I think I'd met them like 3 or 4 times. And I just sat there and cried uncontrollably the whole time because I was like, the next time I'm in this room, it's going to be my mum that's died.
That's pretty brutal.
Yeah. But like I did, so there was some positives to take away that like, I'd never been to a funeral before. So I understand why they thought it would probably be a good idea that I'd been to one. I'd then would understand the process, and my mum was going to be cremated in the same place as this cremation was happening. So I knew where it was, I knew where I was going. Then after that, I knew that like a wake happened, and so there was some positives to take from it, but I think it was a little bit intense for a 15-year-old to be kind of thrown into that, knowing that the next time this happened was going to be my mum.
Yeah, like I think like I didn't go to a funeral until I think it was my granddad's when I was like I think barely a teenager, maybe like 13, and like we had a few dogs that like had passed before I was really able to understand what had happened. And this is gonna sound quite weepy, but like unfortunately I'd been to like a huge string of funerals. So by the time I got to my dad's, it was just like, oh, I've got to organize this one. Like because like the granddad, then there was like the partner of the family friends, and then there was my other grandma on the other side. Um, godfather. There was someone at school who passed away suddenly, so like a bunch of us went to that. Like, yeah, it's kind of shocking how many funerals I've been to when like I'm sub 30. That's quite sad. um, but I think I remember one. I went to my grandmother's funeral with my mum, like her mum, and I remember like I was sat next to her, so I was like supporting her, and there's this weird juxtaposition when like I kind of felt like I was in the parental role at that point, but obviously like that was her parent. And I remember like at the next funeral that we went to on like that side, I said to it was my auntie, my mum's sister, and I said to my brother, I was like, "Can you sit next to mum? Because like I can't go through that again. It was too rough.
Yeah.
I was just like, I can't. It was too much. like, just like really blunt. Just like you need to sit next to her because I can't. I can't do it. I remember speaking at my dad's funeral and just getting up and just be like, yeah. So this is the stuff. Thanks for coming, y'all. Like no sort of ceremony to it. And I remember like not even really being sad because I think again relating to the stuff that you talked about previously. I've mentioned my dad was a bit of a dick. He was an alky. He was a bit of a dickhead. So there's not like a whole bunch of like, well, at least I remember those good times. There's not really that. So like if I do feel sad, it's mostly just that like sense of genuine loss. It's just that emptiness of like I don't have like that type of figure to turn to. And obviously you kind of substitute's not a great word, but like in football terms, you rotate another player on. And I'm really lucky that I've got an amazing support network of great friends and peers that I can speak to about stuff. And it's like it's this thing of it's just difficult. We don't talk about it, but like it's a gap, and like sometimes I'll not think about him for months. Months just won't even concern me, and then like I'll catch a glimpse of someone that looks a bit like him walking down the street, and part of my brain will just malfunction.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, okay, no, it's obviously not him. He's dead. Like,
So
and I think. So, sorry, I know you're gonna say something, but I think one of the ways to understand this, if you haven't experienced grief, is that we experience grief when we lose a pet, or at the end of a relationship, or at the end of a big moment. Like a lot of people experience grief when they leave uni, or parasocially when someone's favorite celebrity dies. Like I was genuinely upset when BB King died. I was actually upset, physically upset. Robin Williams, another one. That's fine. That's totally valid. But when those type of things happen, you are removed. And when you break up with someone, there's always that like you might still see them in the street in 5 years. There's that type of rationalization. It's dealing with the permanence of actual death that I think is really difficult for people to deal with. It's accepting that is gone. Like there's no, you can't text them, you can't call them. Like that's it. And I think that's like a big thing to try and process when you're talking about grief.
So what would you say is like the main thing that happens to you now, the main manifestation of your grief? So for me, it's very rarely sad moments. It's always the best of days that I still think about being able to call my mum and tell her about it. Even though I never left the house prior to her dying, I've never really spoken to her on the phone in my life. But when a really big day was my brother's wedding and then my graduation, I for my graduation, I woke up that morning and thought, this is going to be great. It's a really nice day. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, yeah, my mum's not going to be here. That's really odd. I wonder how my dad's feeling about that. And then it just kind of hit me and like set me back a little bit. So if as you were saying, you didn't really have those kind of happy memories with your dad. Do you still get things like that, or is it a lot different for you?
So this is gonna sound like the dorkiest thing ever. But I think obviously like anniversaries, Father's Day, his birthday, they're always tough. I think like I'm kind of I'm gonna throw in for free. That having done like, I'm now working on my third psychology degree. I'm very good at understanding myself. You can't not turn that knowledge inwards. So I can understand that yes, I'm gonna feel emotions about these days, and that's okay. And sometimes I just listen to some sad music, have a little bit of a cry, and then I'm okay. And it's fine. It passes in like 10 minutes. I definitely know that it's like today's the anniversary, but like it's also just another day. Like if it's just a day and I'm in teaching or I've got work to do, I've just got stuff to do. Like, you know what I mean? I think the other big one though, I think the thing that like stirs a lot of emotion in me is this is the dorky bit. I'm a big football fan, big Liverpool fan. That's something I got from my dad. He was a like massive Liverpool fan. I cannot hear "You'll Never Walk Alone" without tearing up or nearly crying. It is just such a powerful football evokes such like I enjoy football because I can watch it for 90 minutes and feel all those emotions in such extremity, and then like that's it, it's done. No matter what the result is. So I love watching it. But just hearing just you'll never walk alone, hearing the crowd singing it, just I'm in tears every time.
So I was going to ask, how was it for you when Liverpool won the league?
I was in tears. I remember it happening. I remember I was in the Asda, and I just happened to check the score of the Chelsea game and saw the Chelsea were ahead, and I was like, it's gonna happen. Like fell over. I was like, surely not, it's gonna happen. And obviously it was like COVID, it was lockdown. I remember like listening to the commentary, and when it happened, I just was in tears. I was like, huge moment and that was one of the ones where I was like, with football, I remember going to an FA Youth Cup final at Anfield, and Liverpool won. And I remember my dad saying to me like, you'll see this happen again, eventually. We had to survive the Hodgson era to get there. And like, because that was one of the few moments where I was like, my dad would love to have seen this.
Yeah.
Like seeing like the caliber of like the Liverpool team that is currently going, like he'd love this.
Yeah. So weirdly, I'm actually a big Liverpool fan as well.
Nice.
But not brought up on a geographical attachment. None of my family were into football whatsoever, so I was just kind of left to my own devices to pick a team. And the first game of football that like I really connected with was the 2005 Champions League final. Nice. And I was like, I at that age, I was the only thing I could really understand was the magnitude of the moment. And then, I basically followed Liverpool since. So yeah, and even I had, that kind of, emotional setback when Liverpool won the Champions League the year before. I was a bit
seeing Hendo and his dad.
Yeah.
My emotions. That was heavy. That was heavy to see.
Yeah, so I was a bit pissed. I was like, on the drink for a wee while, and I actually missed the second goal because I was so drunk that it was like 80th minute of the game, and I was like, there is no chance Tottenham are scoring. We have won this. This is it.
I'm
done. I went to the kitchen to get the bubbly out, and I missed the goal. Nice. So I was like ringing everyone I knew. I was like quoting lyrics of "You'll Never Walk Alone," and then I was just, once it kind of settled down after about an hour of playing like nonsense Liverpool tunes in the living room, I was like, oh, I kind of wish I could share this with my mum a bit. This has been like the highlight of my year. I went through a bad breakup that year as well, and everything was kind of like building up to this moment of winning the Champions League.
Obviously, you're a football fan. You love your football stats. Okay, let me give you some of this. So that was the 6th anniversary of my dad passing.
Really?
6 years. Yeah. It was a day after his birthday that the final took place. So I knew we were going to win it. I could feel it in my heart. I just knew. Didn't actualize this. Didn't chat. No. I just knew in my heart. I was like, I knew we were going to win. Divock Origi scored 3 goals. The way the whole country ground to a halt for Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II passing away was really interesting to observe, because it just felt like this performative, we're gonna professionally outmourn you. Like Centre Parks, we're gonna close for the day of the funeral so our staff can be with their families, but we don't allow them to do that at Christmas.
Yeah.
Like that makes no sense to me. Like,
And
it just baffles me.
Pure Gym was shut as well from 10 until 2, even though, like, you know, from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m., there isn't any staff in there anyway. They still shut the gym.
Yeah, like just and this whole like people who were there was a queue for the queue, and then people were watching the queue online, and like, you know, 94-year-old woman's eyes is not, it's not really a surprise. She wasn't exactly in the best of health, you know, God love her. And listen, I'm from Liverpool. We generally have a very socialist, very sort of anti-capitalist kind of view, vis-a-vis Liverpool fans booing the national anthem, FA Cup semi-final, final, which, you know, it was for political reasons more than anything. It had nothing to do with the royal family directly, other than we're going to sit on our golden throne and say we're not going to provide any financial support for struggling families and people. Okay, friend. You know, and it was so interesting to observe, like, people who were like dead hyped to be like, yeah, I've been round 7 times to see the coffin, and people queuing for so long. Like,
wait, so that queue that was like 10, 12 hours long, someone went round there 7 times and then got on the news about it?
yes, yeah,
My
that
God, didn't see that. That's crazy.
there was a clip of a woman who said going to visit the Queen at rest is the phrase, I think, like, was better than having kids. Like, at the moment in their life than having kids. Whoa. And I was like, that's heavy, Sam. Look, that, mate, that's pretty heavy.
Yeah, I just tried to stay away from it all because I knew there would be things like that, and I knew it would wind me up. So I just, you know, completely stayed off the internet from like the Thursday to the Monday.
Well, you know, when you see stuff and think, surely this is a meme.
Yeah.
Surely, like, someone swapped some audio out here, and this is a great meme. And I was like, wow. And I understand, like, again, people's feelings totally valid. I understand it brought up a lot of grief for other people, but for me, it was just like wow, you all are feeling this like so deeply for someone that essentially had no actual impact on your life. Like, y'all are in for a shock when someone you care about dies. Let me tell you. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like, you know, oh, she was like everyone's grandma. I was like, my grandma paid taxes. So
yeah.
It's different, really.
Yeah. My grandma had to pay for her own funeral.
Yeah. You know, my gran was a dinner lady. Like, don't remember her Madge ever doing that. You know what I mean?
So what would you say are your top 3 do's and don'ts when it comes to speaking to someone who's just lost someone or just been bereaved?
That is an amazing question, by the way. I'm going to point that out. Top 3 do's and don'ts. Let's do the don'ts first, because they're possibly a bit easier. Don't walk on eggshells around them. Treat them exactly the same. Like, it's so dehumanizing when, you know, people like aren't saying or doing things that they would normally do, and you're supposed to be your mates. Like, if they were going to make a joke, like, let them make the joke. Like, it's okay. You know what I mean? Even if the joke was about someone dying. Like, I talk a lot about, like, from like the disability community, like how many idioms are rooted in ableism. Like, you know, love is blind, and just for an example, right? Technically a bit ableist. Like, it's okay. You know, we can try and change the language, but like, oh, you know, oh, that was dead nice. Oh, crap, I said dead. Oh, sorry, don't get. Oh no, like, or oh, I was just speaking to my dad. Oh no, I'm sorry, your dad's dead. Oh, like, that's just like, it's just awkward. Don't do that. Don't be that guy or girl or person. Don't do that. Second don't, I think, is definitely don't, like, distance yourself from them. Like, I think, again, because people don't know what to do, they're like, oh, well, I'll just let them get on with it. You know, you touched on with your mate there, you didn't know what was going on, so you just left it. Just like check in, like just send a message like how's it going? Like, do you need water, food, medications? When was the last time you stretched, slept? That sort of thing. Really good, like just go to checklist. Because not every conversation has to be heavy. And I think the other don't like be dismissive. We sort of both reference this kind of like whole like, oh, I'm being made to feel I'm gonna drop a clanger. Like I am like mentioning like me dad or your mum or something. Just don't make people feel like that. Just accept that it's okay. It's akin to like when someone brings the footy up because they know your team haven't done well that weekend.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you know what they're doing. You just let it slide and go, it's okay. It's fine. Dues, I think check-in is the reverse of not checking in. I do think definitely check in. Just because like it's when you are kind of in that pit, it is really easy to forget to do things like eat and like look after yourself properly.
Yeah,
So,
that's
like someone like coming to like force feed, not force feed. That's triggering terminology, but like ensure that you eat a hearty meal via supervision is really quite helpful.
Yeah, we one of the girls in the group, she said that I can't remember how long it was, maybe a month, 6 weeks after she lost her dad. Her friends just turned up at her house and said, "Okay, we're gonna hoover your room and we're gonna tidy it up." And she was like, could not have even fathomed the idea that that's what I needed, but it was the best thing that happened to me that week.
I think other dues, I think like it kind of piggybacks on that. I think to um it's different for everyone, but I found it really useful to really collect like all the physical possessions and like physical like stuff. Because part of it was like logistics, like tidying and moving stuff and that sort of thing. But like getting rid of stuff that you don't need, like don't just hold on to everything. You have to remove some level of sentimentality, and like keeping a couple of things. Like I've got like a couple of bits of jewelry and like a match day program or something that my dad got me once. Like when Dirk Kuyt scored a hat trick against United, Dirk Kuyt was my favorite player. Little things like that are like these are good enough because I think no matter what, like I've got a couple of rings and I'm terrified of losing them. So much that I often don't wear them because I'm scared I'm going to lose them and that'd be really upsetting. Like have a couple of trinkets, have a couple of things, but like no one can ever take away the memories you've got, and that's the thing, you know what I mean? And that's okay. You don't because there's sometimes this emphasis of like because people don't know what to do. Like, oh well, you can keep hold of everything and in your own time. Sometimes you kind of need a little bit of a push that is like a okay, let's think about what is actually practical and like what
Yeah.
is just developing that new type of mold.
Yeah, so I've got this. This is my mum's wedding ring. And that's basically all I have. And I only picked this up earlier this year. I was kind of like really avoidant from, sentimental stuff. I even like as part of the pre-processing of her death, I would get rid of things that if I'd left there until after she died would have had sentimental value. And I kind of regret doing that. But, I don't really blame me too much. I was like 15, 16 and still trying to work out who I was, never mind navigate this nonsense. So now like I find I have a much more calm approach to the trinkets and the sentimentality. It's not, but way back then it was so chaotic. It was like this is either going to be something that I cherish forever, or every time I look at it, it's going to freak me out.
And I think my last do, and this is gonna sound again a bit whimsical, but like do like it sounds counterbalanced, but like also do things when you're ready. Like we did not scar my dad's ashes for years.
All right.
Because we were just not prepared to. Again, I talked about this knock on of like we also had a house to sell and things like that. Like we had the cremation, then the undertakers had the ashes, and obviously legally they can't get rid of them until you sign that off. I legitimately thought they might have just disposed of them, like so many years had passed. I remember ringing them, like, yeah, we've got them. Like,
All right.
and and I actually went with my sister, and I was like, right, we're gonna go on an adventure, and we're gonna scatter like a few of these ashes. So we paid for them to be scattered in like a local, serenity garden, I think they call it. We took just like a small sample. Again, really macabre fashion. But I was like, what do I transport my dad's ashes in? So I took an empty hot chocolate container.
Did they not come in a wee box? No.
Well, obviously humans make quite a lot of ashes.
Yeah.
There
Oh,
was a
right.
big shoebox, and I was like, I don't want all of them, mate. Like I can't. I just want like a little bit. You know what I mean? So it makes me laugh, and it's so macabre. But he gave me like the ends that they use for babies, and he gave me two of them, and then like I just didn't want to put them in my bag, so I put these two containers in the hot chocolate container. And I was there, and there was part of me that went, my dad would find this hilarious. Because it's just this little cardboard tube. It's got a teddy bear on it, and I was just like, oh my days. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever experienced. Like, but I put them in the hot chocolate things. Like, I don't want them all over me bag. That's gonna be awkward.
Yeah.
Like, so then we went to like a couple of like important locations, like where the rest of the family's ashes were and things like that, and like scattered them. And that was like quite a nice thing. And then we went for a carvery afterwards.
Yeah.
Because nice bit of food after that. We joke about that all the time. But that was like a nice adventure. It was like a homage. But we needed that long to be ready to do it. And I think if we had just at the time said, no, you guys get rid of them, we would have felt a bit sad about that. I think the whole knowing that you can walk into a space, and it's what we've had here. I say this knowing you parasocially through email and through the previous episode, of knowing that people are going to get it. You're not going to be asked about how you react or how you are emotionally because it's part of the thing. You might just be a grumpy, like a butthead, and to a degree, that's going to be okay because sometimes things hit you like that, and it's fine. I think again, it's something that I really would have appreciated and made use of at the time when I was going through my bereavement. And it's I came across it and was like, wow, this is great. I wish I'd known about it. I think, like boys, gents, people that identify as men, like talk about it. Don't you're doing nothing but harming yourself if you don't share it. Like turn up to it. Let's talk about loss. You have to be aware that you're not like trauma dumping. It's kind of like the go-to phrase. Like you can't just walk into the office and be like, by the way, blah blah. That's not cool. Times and spaces. But when you know that you have a time and a space, like let's talk about loss meeting, where it is okay to do that, do it. Be involved. I think games are a great way to bring people together. Like, let's have a FIFA tournament, lads, but also talk about why we're sad. Like, you can do both. You can have a good time and talk about your feelings.
Yeah, I would say that's the best thing about Let's Talk About Loss. So all the groups are quite different and they all just kind of like self-manage themselves. So what we do at the Glasgow group is we meet up in a cafe on a Sunday, and it's like quite a public space. And I was quite skeptical of that initially, because people around might be like, "What's going on over there?" with like 6 people sat there crying. But I think that naturally brings a casual nature to it. So you know that you're going to come to a space where you can talk, you can cry. People are not going to judge you. People are going to understand what you're saying, especially if you're saying things like, "I feel guilty that I'm not as sad as I should be." Things that people who haven't lost anyone would really not understand. But the casual nature of the cafe kind of keeps it lighthearted, and we don't just talk about sad things. We catch up with each other every time. We share a bit about ourselves, what we do. If we've got loved ones and kids and stuff, and we make friends. And
I think that's really important because it's having that connection with someone, knowing that like if you have that network that you come together, maybe you branch off, you make friends sort of privately, but it's like that they understand. Like I think I would go so far as to say that I'm really at peace with how I feel. You know what I mean? Like I'm not, presently in therapy or anything for it. I probably, everyone will benefit from therapy. Am I right? But like in terms of my actual grief, like I'm okay with it. It's been nearly 10 years. It's gone so fast. But
Yeah.
like I know how I feel about it. I am sentient enough to know that when I'm heading towards a low moment, that I can catch it early and stop it getting too bad and take the steps to remove myself or like get in touch with a mate and go to the pub, like just to get me back on, feeling all right about stuff. But just knowing that you have people that you can speak to about it is so important. And I think again to really center that on like lads, it's so necessary. Like if again you're hurting no one but yourself if you don't do it.
Exactly.
And there should be no shame or stigma in doing it. Like I'll chat about anything about anyone. You get some really daft questions when you're not being on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It happens. So you just learn to get used to it. But until you take that first step and being unafraid to even just say how you feel, however that is, you won't know. It's a bit like a swimming pool. Sometimes you just got to get in there. It might be a bit cold, but you'll adjust to the temperature.